So a shout out to Temple David, a shout out to my mom who's online. So hi mom. Um, so we're going to get right into this, and I am gonna my prayer, the non-traditional prayer is going to be that the internet stays with me. So forgive me on that in advance. Torah study. So la asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So I'm going to focus on choices. And as you see in my first slide here, the Hebrew word for election, bechirot, is from the same root as the word for choice. So when we think about what we base our choices on, let's go into that for a minute here. So if you want to write in the chat, please feel free. In terms of let's narrow in on a choice regarding where you're going to live. And I recently moved, so I had this choice right before me. But when you make a choice, such as a big choice of where you are going to live, what goes into it? So if you wish to put in the chat, please do. Other Jews, no source sheet. We're just looking at my PowerPoint. By the ocean, location and safety, on freedom, voting choice, handicap accessible, right? So some is more specifically about the home, and some is more is about the outside. The question was, when you make a choice such as where to live, what goes into your decision making, right? Near family, that was what influenced our choice to live near family and friends. So you can keep putting in, right? Safety, well-being, affordability, right? So if we look at this, and you can keep going, please do, then worship place, right? Of course, obviously, especially if you're going to walk to shul and so forth. We have an advertisement for Canada. Thank you, Judy. And so I'm in the States. And so let's go right into this. And what I want to do is be able to, well, first I want to be able to advance my slide because that would really help me be able to do this. Okay, so we look at this, right, Betsy? I'm going to use this as my last one, right? Job opportunities, access to public transportation, goods and services, diverse population, affordability. From now on, I'm going to invite Mara, and thank you, Mara, for allowing me to teach, to be in charge of chat and letting me know stuff so I can focus on the text before us. But just take a look at this. Take a look at this, and we're not going to read through it. But this is just a somewhat, list, and you'll see the source at the top of what goes into choosing where to live. But when we get into the article surrounding this, it of course says job opportunities and housing costs, but this is what they go on to say. But the difficult part of choosing where to live isn't actually gathering an acceptable list of potentially relevant factors, or even coming up with a completely unique list that details your specific likes and dislikes. The most challenging part of this process seems to be balancing the trade-offs between factors, or determining the relative importance of each factor. So there's actually some studies about how where you live says a lot about you. And there's studies about whether you choose where to live based on what is of interest to you, or the impact of the place onto its people. And there's long articles that basically say they don't know. But there are some actual factors, and the Huffington Post has just a really interesting article that said, for example, people in Illinois, I don't know if anyone here's from Illinois, are competitive and less creative. No offense, I didn't say this. Less creative in their thinking, while residents of Vermont are incredibly introverted. But it's really interesting. It goes through psychological factors of how where you live says something about you. And so if you want to go to Truity, Truity, that's where the source is. And I didn't want to spend too much time because we're going into sacred text. So what we're going to do is really think about why Lot chose to move where he chose to move. And so we're going to start with some context actually from the end of the previous portion in order to get into Lot. I don't know about you. I don't feel like I've spent that much time with Lot. So this is part of it. Let's see if we can advance this. Okay. So I'm happy to, I'd love to hear other voices read the text. So if someone wants to unmute, and Mara, maybe you can call on someone to read this from the end of the Parshat Noach.
Great. If anyone is able to raise their Zoom hand, here we have Sheila. We can ask you to unmute. You should be able to read.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Okay, should I read?
please.
Okay. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram. And they set out together. Literally, they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah came to 205 years, and Terah died in Haran.
Thank you. So to set the scene here, we see that that they went forth, right? And that's why I did the literal, and I didn't include the Hebrew there, though in future slides we get to this parsha, I will. They went forth with them. So part of the question, who's the they and who's the them, which impacts us, and I invite you to really think about that, right? So is it that Terach and son go forth, right? Terach and Abram go forth. Is it Abram and Lot, the next generation, as it were, go forth? Is it Abram and Sarai, who are going to start the Jewish people, go forth, right? Is it Haran's family, which, right? Who is it who is taking who forward? And so Rashi thinks that Terach and Abram went forth and Lot and Sarai came with them. Others are going to probably agree with that, but I think that to me it reframes it if we don't know who the they and them are. And given Hebrew, when it's Hebrew male plural, Sarai could be part of that. So who sets on the journey, right? This is the beginning of the journey, and we're going to get into the next part as well. But Terach is going forward, and there is a text that suggests that in fact Terach lived 60 years. 60 years, the numbers aren't the same as ours, after Abram and Sarai and Lot have left. So I've always read this before as the idea that once Terach passed away, then they continued this journey that he had set out for Canaan, right? But at the same time, again, things shift. If he said no, go ahead, or if he was ill and said go ahead, and they left him, or maybe they left him like joyously, hey, you're good to go here, you got all your needs met, we're going to just go forward. But Eitz Chaim commentary is the one I love. Eitz Chaim commentary, which really figures out the math to it of how old would Terach be when they left. So I give that as a framing, and then we're going to continue on into another text here. I'll just read it since it's so short. But we have, right, as I just said, Abram went forth as Adonai commanded him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. So again, we're not going to worry exactly about the ages here, but it's interesting that they are moving forward. I'm going to give you one other piece. I don't know about you. I haven't done that much with Lot before. Lot in Hebrew means covering, which is an interesting a translation. I didn't know that. I looked it up thanks to Safaria. And it also could mean envelope in modern day times. So I don't know if that speaks to us also of who this character Lot is going to be, but very interesting. And of course, Avram and Sarai take forward the child of his deceased brother. So they are going forward in mourning, right? Avram is in mourning, right? Sarai is in mourning, right? And of course, Lot, with his father having died, is in mourning as well. So I think I'm going to let us continue moving on, though I see a hand up. If Barry, you want to read, that's great. I don't know if you have a question as well, but I just want to make sure we get to everything. So Barry, are you wanting to be a reader here as we get into this week's text? And if other people want to put their hands up, I really invite you to, because I have other texts to read. All of them are a verse or two, nothing longer, really.
It looks like Barry had a question, so lowered his hand.
Okay, you put the chat, Barry, please, and then Mara can bring it forward, because I can't see the chat at the moment. Okay, so any readers, or otherwise you're just stuck with me? So you can stick your hands up and I'll call on you in the future, which is great. So from Egypt, Abram went up into the Negev with his wife and all that he possessed, together with Lot. Now Abram was very rich in cattle, silver, and gold. I want to make a quick comment that for me, I'm probably going to go back and forth from Abram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah. Their names have not yet changed. But we know them that way, so forgive me, and I hope that isn't confusing to people. So let's just note how he got to be very rich in cattle, silver, and gold. And so forgive me putting it this way, but if you kind of sell your wife as your sister, you can economically profit from that. So we don't recommend it in the future. Don't try this at home. But right, this is a story that comes before. And it comes repeatedly. But we're wondering how this shepherd who's told to Lech Lecha to go forth, all of a sudden has all of this wealth. And the wealth is going to be a key part of what sort of the climax of our story with Lot is. So as we go forward, please just keep in mind all of these different things. And again, Mara, if you're checking the chat and you have anything you want to share with me, let me know. Okay, so we're going to just continue into the text itself as we build to what is happening in this mini story. Again, if hands go up, then I would love you to read, and if not, you're stuck with me. I'll just keep going for now. And he proceeded, Avram, and he proceeded by stages from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been formerly, between Bethel and Ai, the site of the altar that he had built there at first, and there Avram invoked Adonai by name. So I think that we should think about, what is it like to to go back home, to retrace your steps, right? So they had been there before, and in going back to this same altar, right? And they're invoking God by name. One of the things that we're going to be imagining, I think, is what we do when we go home, right? When we go back to visit. We've already been starting to talk about going back to Pittsburgh, living there 18 years and being away. When is it we're going to go back and visit people and eat at all the places we have to eat at, right? Drive by the old house, do the things, right? So of course, Abraham is on a much higher spiritual level because he is going back to the altar and he is invoking God by name, right? So let us keep this in mind as foreshadowing to when you get to a place, what do you do? Right. And of course, in the Talmud, we have lots of things in terms of if you live here for so long, you have to invest this way in the community. If you live here in the soup kitchen, and if it's longer, you have to, right. And the longer you live, the deeper your commitment to your community is, right? So here we have Avram, and that's just kind of an aside, but Avram, right, coming back to the altar and offering this offering by invoking God by name. So I think, Connie, I'm hoping you want to read. Would you read, please? Thank you.
Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support them staying together, for their possessions were so great that they could not remain together.
Thank you. So let's see if we could take a few voices, because it's nice to not just hear mine. How did Lot have flocks and herds and tents, do you think? Anyone want to share? Or if you're more comfortable writing in the chat, you could do that too. But how did Lot come to have flocks and herds and tents? And it's interesting to call it tents, right? Does it mean he kind of has portable housing? Does that mean he has the people who go in the tents, right? Terming it tents to me is a very interesting way of putting it. And so I'm gonna do a quick scan here, similar to Avram, right? So it might be, right, that Avram, right, maybe he was sharing them, maybe he inherited them from his father, right? So these are great, right, questions, right? Because if Avram was open with, oh, I got all of this stuff from Pharaoh, and shares it, right, magnanimously, right? That's lovely. We're going to see what happens, right? God gives them all is beautiful. In terms of inheriting from his father, it's different. He's what would you call it? Independently wealthy, as it were. He's not described that way as before, right? So it could be that he was, and we just didn't hear it. But I wonder about that shaping. And also, thank you for everyone. Now that I'm getting to read the chat. Also, right, is he's the father of Moab, Ruth and King David, the Messianic age line. Excuse me. Right, he is. But right now, he's this kind of orphaned person, though not without resources, right? And if you have resources, we all know, right? He has what we in this day and age, right, we'll call privilege. So so he has some ability to be able to make some decisions, presumably on his own. But as Aidan says, affluence of family becomes a threat to its tranquility. And we can see that at times too, right? For all the blessings of having affluence, there can be strife based on affluence as well, especially if your but if your affluence eats pastures, right? If it's not stocks and bonds, then there's going to be sort of challenges to this. So yeah, that's cute that he had tents but wasn't a happy camper. I like it. That's good. And we need smiles these days, so that's excellent. Okay, so we're going to go on into the text. And Myrna, you look like you want to read, I think, please, if you would.
Mute. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, and there was quarreling between the herders of Abram's cattle and those of Lot's cattle. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were then dwelling in the land. Abram,
Okay. Oh,
okay,
sorry.
that's
Susie,
okay.
going.
Go. Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, between my herders and yours, for we are kin."
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. Thank you. So
Okay.
So what's with that, right? We're hearing this story, right? It's building up. We're at just at this point where there's quarreling, and we know that therefore something's going to happen with it, and we get sort of the narrator interrupting, right? Which sometimes we know, right? With Jacob wrestling with the messenger, with the angel, right? All of a sudden we have a kosher rule come in. But here, right, the Canaanite and the Perizzites were then dwelling in the land. And what, right? So again, we could do some real voices, or we could do some chat here. But why is this here now? Why are we hearing the Canaanite and the Perizzites, right? So battles the old west, Michael is saying, right? And so if the Canaanites and the Perizzites also have sheep and goat, which presumably some of them do, that there's now there's a resource problem. Any other thoughts of why is this here? I mean, we might nowadays, right, feel like it's foreshadowing to, stresses to come for millennia. But that being said, right now, anything else comes to mind? That one, yeah, never happy, fear, and greed. Kathy's saying, and maybe that idea, right, is that you never have enough, right? I don't know. Maybe there were not Canaanites and Perizzites at the time the story was told. It says they were then dwelling in the land. So that would be sort of changing history, I think, if I'm reading that right, Andrea. But that's really interesting, right? If they weren't there then, right? Arguing who had the better cattle, land can only support a certain amount. So with apologies for a page that has way too many words. Oh, Andrea, you wanting to read or you want to make a comment? No, it's okay. When you get to it. Okay, so sorry
But
about the
Can
words.
you hear me now?
Yes. Did you want to
Okay.
say anything you want to read?
Yeah, the story was not written down exactly at the time that it occurred, right? This is a story that people were told about their history. Okay? And you know, if you listen to what happened with Joshua, they got rid of all those people, or sort of. So at the time the story was being told, when people were sitting around a campfire, listening to this story before it was actually written down, maybe there weren't Canaanites and Perizzites, and that the people listening to the story wouldn't know
Right,
that they were there at the time of Abraham.
yeah, very interesting, right? So, or maybe they were there and people reading it later wouldn't know the context and they actually had to say it opposite. I'm not trying to challenge you, right? But if it was not written at the time, right, are you kind of, you know, sort of changing history a little bit? Or are you saying, oh, hey, everybody who's going to read this in the future, here's some context clues. So
No,
yeah.
no, the, the tense it's written in is in the past, right? It's the tense is, it indicates somebody's telling something that happened in the past. It's not changing history. It's paying attention to the tense of the verb. The person telling the story is talking about something that happened in the past. And
Right.
and so we don't know when he told this story. We don't know if it probably wasn't the next day. It was probably sometime later, when there was somebody to tell the story to. He's probably not telling it to Isaac. He's telling it sometime later. And
Right.
and so at that time, maybe they that was history. It's like saying, well, where I live, the Okanagan Indians used to live here.
Right.
And
No,
I wouldn't know that if somebody didn't tell me.
agreed. I think I misheard you, so I appreciate that you're correcting that. And yes, right. And that's a great parallelism. I very much appreciate it. I think I'm going to get to more of the text and make sure I save the chat because there's like really some good things here, right? So here, yeah. So we're gonna, Arlene, later. I want you to also put that in about when he chooses to settle near Sodom, right? Where there's a lot of evil. Maybe the Canaanites and Perizzites foreshadow separation between the two, good and evil. I mean, we don't know if they're evil, right? Right, a hard word, but look, here are the ideas of why this is included per our text, right? The area already had settled an agricultural urban community, so both Abraham and Lot have to leave the area. In other words, there's not enough land, right? Quarreling because Lot's shepherds were wicked men and grazed their Lot's shepherds were wicked men and grazed their cattle in other people's fields. Abraham's shepherds rebuked them for this act of robbery, but they replied, hey, this land has been given to Abraham, and since he has no son as heir, Lot will be his heir. Consequently, this is not robbery. In other words, Abraham is going to get this anyway, because, you know, God promised it. And then Lot is going to get it because Abraham has no heir. So it's going to be his anyway. What's the difference? But then scripture states the Canaanite and the Perizzites abode then in the land, different translation. So Abraham was not yet entitled to possession. In other words, that argument was not going to cut it for Rashi. And then we have now Abram and Lot were both strangers and sojourners in the land. Abram therefore feared that the Canaanite and the Perizzite who inhabit the land might hear of the abundance of their cattle, whose great number was made apparent when Lot's shepherds encroached on Abram's land, thereby confining the flocks. So now you have a lot of flocks. And drive them out of the land, or slay them by sword and take their cattle and wealth, since the mastery of the land belonged to them, not to Abram. Scripture thus mentioned that there are many peoples dwelling in that land, and that they and their cattle being innumerable, the land could not support them and Abram and Lot. So there are a lot of dynamics here, right? Abram is worried about what's going to happen if, right, all of this goes, goes on with all of these cattle coming on and so forth. And another one, Cleakar, and the numbers mean 17th century. These two great nations, the Canaanite and Perizzites, live in the land without any argument, but the land is unable to support these two shepherds living together, which I think is really interesting, right? That what a comment, right? The Canaanites and the Perizzites can pull off living together, but Avram and Lot, like two individual people, right? The Canaanite and the Perizzites are tiny, but the Canaanites, they can pull this off. What's with these two individuals, right? And kind of, no matter how much cattle and all that you have, if you're one person, it's just relatively not that much cattle, which is a comment back onto Avram and Lot, right? So, Rachel, are you wanting to speak or are you wanting to read? You nodded your head, so I don't know if that's both, but we'll go ahead.
I just wanted to add in, coming from someone who married into a farming family, this is a very, very important issue as to who owns what, because of what can happen in the future. And not necessarily at the time this happened, but later, especially if there is marrying outside the group. And that I personally, because I come from the United States and my husband was German, I had to sign a prenuptial agreement that I would never be able to inherit the land because, but my children, my future children would be, and they have.
That's really great that you shared that. Thank you. And it makes me think biblically, even though, right, you're giving us a real story, but Zelophehad's daughters are similar. They're worried that the tribes are gonna lose the land allocated to them when they were allowed to inherit. And so they could still inherit, but they had to marry within their tribe, but very similar kinds of stories. So we're gonna keep going here. I'm hoping hands up are raised to read. And if not, if you put in the chat, I'd love it, but I want to make sure we can get through the whole text. So Crystal, you wanna read? I know this is a lot of words here, but just read the English starting right there.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Is not the whole land before you? Let us separate. If you go north, I will go south, and if you go south, I will go north. Lot looked about him and saw how well watered the whole plain of the Jordan, all of it. This was before Adonai had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, all the way to Zoar, like the garden of Eden, of Yahweh, of Adonai. Sorry, I'm in my conversion process, so I'm very new.
Lovely to have
Like
you
the
here.
land of Thank you. Like the land of Egypt. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastwards. Thus, sorry, my screen's been blocked a little. I can't see the bottom there. Could you raise?
Wait a minute. Thus they parted from each other. So
Thus they
thank you.
parted from each other.
My apologies, because I meant to put that into English and the commentary from Sefaria doesn't put it in English. So I'm so sorry. But yes, so Richard points out what I was about to point out also, and that is these are the same texts, just smaller. I put the others in purple. So let's start with Zoar, right? So it's the southern tip of the plain of Jordan where Lot later flees to when Sodom is destroyed. Right. So later on, and we know this is coming, right, that first of all, we have, again, the narrator comes in with before God had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So we know that this is coming. We also know that Zoar all the way down to Zip is where Lot is able to find refuge and God doesn't destroy it. We also have this bizarre thing, right? Meek Hedem, if you look here in the middle of 11, from the east. So he removed Abram, who was in Bethel, and went westward of Abram. Consequently, he traveled from the east to the west. So the thing is, when he traveled eastward, it's literally from the east. It's right. So we have a geographic issue happening right here. But the midrashic explanation, even more, I have to say, is interesting to me. He wandered away from the originator, and I tried to bold my little kedem in the middle of that. Of the universe, saying, I want neither Avram nor his God. So look at what Genesis Rabbah does, right? And Rashi quotes it, is saying, hey, this isn't really about land anymore. This is about Lot sort of, going away from them, right? But the confusion of saying from the east is confusing in terms of that he's if you go from the east, you're going west. So I won't spend a lot of time on it. If that's of interest to you, look at it further and go into a map. But this idea of maybe that he's in fact journeying away from God. So let's go to this verse, right? So sorry, going back, that he chooses the whole plain of the Jordan, right? So it's well watered, right? So well watered means you're not dependent on rain. You have the Nile or two large rivers. There are different ideas. The Nile seems kind of far away to me, but maybe my geography's off. It means he's unlikely to suffer from drought. And this idea of the Garden of God seems to be a reference to the Garden of Eden, which is what you started to say when you were reading, which had a lot of trees, as when perennially watered. And the idea of the connection to the land of Egypt, which is also interesting, seems to be a connection to seed. That so that's per Rashi. So you're going to have like really what you need. And so it was that this is what he does, right? Avram remained in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the plain, pitching his tents near Sodom. So when they parted, we don't have any language. What do you think, right? What might they have said to each other? So I'll invite you in the chat if anyone wants to think about that for a second, right? So Abram remains, Lot goes off to the cities of the plain. Seeing if anyone's typing in. So one of the comments, while I hope you are typing or thinking, is that Abram's swift action ensures that the quarrel is ended without rancor, right? So Abram, offers, hey, whatever way you want to go, you go, I'll go the other way, right? And then Lot chooses what seems to be the better land, or at least this is described land. And we'll go back to take a quick look at that again, right, without all the commentary, right? If you go north, I'll go south. It's actually east-west, but all of that. And we don't hear what Avram's land looks like or feels like, or how much rain is coming in, or if it's by a river and whatever it might be. And so we have this, right? So let's see. Amiable parting, Rebecca's saying, because Avram later goes to war to save Lot, right? And also, right, absolutely, sorry, yes. Emotional, right? Very interesting in terms of what might have been said. Do they just sort of shake hands or hug each other and just sort of go on their way? We don't know that they are right long time together, right? Abraham does go to save him, but we don't hear of an ongoing relationship between them. But so he moves on. So what someone pointed out to me that I seem to quote Indiana Jones as a sacred text. So I'm going to do it again, Deb. But so in the language of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is a bizarre thing to quote because it's like, with the Holy Grail and the whole thing, Lot chose poorly, right? We know what he chose, right? And so so he chooses this, and we have to wonder, right? Did he not know, or was it not important to him? Why did he choose to go to near Sodom, right? So let's think about what are the balancing. And as we do, I want to go to one other slide here, two other slides. Now the inhabitants of Sodom were very wicked sinners. So we have that. We immediately learn, this is pointed out in the chat as well. And we also, there was my quote there, want to contrast for a minute of what did Avram do, right? So what does Avram do? And you'll be stuck hearing me read yet again. And Adonai said to Avram, after Lot departed from him, raise your eyes and look out from where you are to the north, the south, the east, and the west. For I give all the land that you see to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth. So if one can count up the dust of the earth, then your offspring too can be counted. Up, walk about the land through its length and its breadth, for I give it to you. And Abraham moved his tent, came to dwell at the terebinths of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and he built an altar there to God. Remember when he was passing through and he revisited the old altar, and he called God by name, presumably, I'm guessing, offering a sacrifice also. Abraham moves, and this is what he does, right? He moves his tent, he builds an altar, he revisits an altar, whatever it might be, right? Which is in contrast to Sodom. We don't hear anything. And yet, in the New Testament, this particular translation, I don't know much about different translations, but God also rescued Lot out of Sodom because he was a righteous man who was sick of the shameful immorality of the wicked people around him. So I had never heard this text before. I think it's very interesting to call Lot righteous, because of the challenge of when the strangers are there, the messengers of God, right? He is trying to protect them, and in protecting them, he's offering his daughters to this horrible crowd that could do whatever they please with his daughters. Makes the name righteous kind of difficult for us, but really interesting because it makes me think of Noah. Right? Noah was described as righteous in his age, right? So is Noah righteous in absolute terms? Is he righteous in relative terms? By the end of the story, he's not named as righteous. We probably talked about all this last week. And I understand last week felt like a very long time ago. But and I appreciate, again, all these different comments. Yes, Noah got drunk. So the question is, what is the impact here on Lot, right, of where he lives, like we started? So if we think about the factors that went into his decision making, right, then we think of saying that Lot's daughters are evil. I mean, we hear the story afterwards, and just sorry, I don't want to confuse people, but if you keep reading, that they think that all the men on the earth are gone, and so they get their father drunk and sleep with him. So there's family stuff here, but they're not described that way in the text itself. So when we think about what went into his decision, right? Did he really not know, right? Did Lot really not know where he was moving, or did it really not matter to him so much? So let's just think about this, that here are the factors that even in this short time we went through, right? And these are included, and you can add more certainly. Lot was a mourner, right? But he was taken in by Sarai. He was on a journey set forth by his grandfather, continued by his uncle and aunt, and now seemingly is making his own journey. Lot is a wealthy man. He's a businessman, right? Providing for his flocks, herds, and tents, which seem to be the primary reason he chose the land. He's an immigrant. He's a non-altar builder, as it were. So unclear what kind of, if any, relationship he had with God. And all of these went into his decision to go into this land that has consequence for him, right? The article I mentioned at the beginning was the most challenging part of choosing a place to live seems to be balancing the trade-offs between factors or determining the relative importance of each factor. And so one person says the best thing to do, one realtor or whatever, is, you know, experimental approach, right? Go live somewhere, try it out, learn as you go. Not everyone has that luxury to be able to do it. But we can think about, what do we imagine Lot discovers about himself once he moves to the suburbs of Sodom? So I think that's really the question, right? Lot makes his decision. To me, it looks primarily economic, as it were. And what does it discover? What does he discover? Once he moves to where he moves, he doesn't move away, right? Even when he sees what's happening. So whether it is, right, so there's a lot of economics coming through, so thank you. And other comments. And so does anybody want to put in the chat or speak to whether there were other factors that influenced Lot, or what maybe, how maybe he changed by moving to, not the story of what happened later, right? But how might he, personality wise or whatever, have changed? So any other thoughts here?
Rabbi, while we wait for comments in the chat, or if anyone wants to raise their hand in these last few minutes, I will say that I've been in the habit of putting our Torah leaders on the spot, and as a closing thought, asking for a blessing for the Shabbat ahead. So you can think about that as we wait for folks to share their thoughts.
I'm seeing some, and I do my homework. So in listening to a previous one, I saw that. So
Great.
good. I'm good. So yeah, so I think it's really interesting to think about what influences our decisions. And obviously this past week in America, we made decisions, whatever way we voted or we chose not to vote or whatever that is, right? But we can think about the impact, what impacted our decision. And we can think about what impacted the decision of people who maybe decided differently than us, right? That there are a lot of facts here. So I think the takeaway really is that we are affected, because I see this question, and I'm sorry if this doesn't feel very clear, but the takeaway is that we are made up of many different decisions that have been impacted by many choices we have made in the past and things that just happened to us. And so it's a way to allow ourselves to be thoughtful in our future decisions, and perhaps to be more full of grace regarding people whose decisions might be different than ours. So I think what I'm going to need to do is probably end with the blessing, and that, do I do that? And then if we have time for the questions, or what are you thinking, Mary? You tell me.
If we can get to Michael very, very quickly, and then you can answer his thought, and then we can end with your blessing for Shabbat.
Okay.
I think in Lot's case, he didn't know exactly where he was moving to and what the environment was like. When he saw what was there, I don't think he may have made a lot of money in terms of wealth of cattle, but he didn't like it. And maybe he was even afraid of it too.
Maybe. But he didn't move. But that's the question, right? If you're like, I don't know, if you're moving somewhere, do you not have you didn't hear any rumors about Sodom and Gomorrah? Really? Right? So that's an interesting question of how naive are we, or is it naivete, or is it priorities?
Can I give you an example?
Sure.
If you grew up in what they call today the hood, it's hard to get out of there because it's a certain type of mentality,
right,
that if you grown up in an upper class suburb, you'd have no clue. You don't get it.
Yeah. No, I appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you. Mary, do we have time for Jack, or?
It's so hard to say no. Jack, if we can keep it very short.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you had mentioned that Lot was a good person, but that comes from the New Testament. You didn't mention that. I mean, who believes that Lot was a good person? I don't.
Well, Right. No, I appreciate that. And I brought that forward because I just did like a Google search on Lot, which is hard because given the word, it's hard to find him. And the fact that in the New Testament, which is not Jewish tradition, he's considered a righteous person, does it make us think, wait a minute, how do we look at Lot as a righteous person? Or is it just, you know what, we are just going to differ. We're just going to differ in that opinion. But I brought it forward without much explanation just to say, wow, that's really a different take, because nowhere was he described as righteous. We don't
Correct.
know that language about him either. Yes. So, all right. So a closing blessing is, may what we discover about ourselves when the landscape has shifted lead us to accept the challenge, often an overwhelming challenge, to live our values. Amen. Shabbat shalom.
Amen. Shabbat shalom. Thank you all for being here. We hope to learn with you again next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Rabbi.